In the grim darkness of the far future, there are forgotten stories. Welcome to Alex Gordon Audios.
Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to the start of a new saga. Today we descend into a forgotten corner of the galaxy to begin a brand new series, Warhammer 40,000, Echoes of Divinity. We journey to Tyrone Hive Primus, a towering cathedral of rust and decay, and go deeper still into its festering, lawless heart, the Underhive. Here, amongst the filth and the endless violence, a war rages on a brittle front line. And in the trenches a man sits in chains, a prisoner known only as number 444. His past is a ghost, held within the tattered pages of a journal from another world, and his mind is a storm, sealed within an iron collar. But as the forces of the Imperium face annihilation, they are left with a desperate choice. For in the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes the only weapon you have left is the one you cannot control. Prepare yourselves. The story of a caged Psyker and the divine echoes of his power begins now.
Chapter 1. Prisoner. No. 444. Tyrone Hive Primus. Deep within the festering depths of Tyrone Hive, in the suffocating gloom of the Underhive, war raged. The Underhive, the lowest, most wretched strata of a hive city that towers like a cathedral of rust and industry, had long been a lawless sprawl of filth and anarchy, a place where life was priced in bullets and brutality rather than coin. But now, amidst the decay and the echoing howls of violence, a brittle battlefront had emerged. At the only passageway that led from the Underhive upwards toward the lower hive, a ramshackle fortress had been thrown together from scavenged scrap, sandbags, and corroded girders. The Planetary Defense Force, PDF, the local militia of Talon 1, held the line here. Weary soldiers of the 44th Tyrone Infantry Regiment manned the trenches, commanded by Captain Burr Halverson, a broad-shouldered officer with a voice like a whip crack. "Filth-licking dregs," he bellowed. "While true soldiers bleed in the Emperor's name against that evolutionist rot, you grovel like hive scum. Move. Get moving. Build the supply points, reinforce the defenses, or I'll make sure you feel the lash. Faster, faster. We don't have time to waste." Burr's furious roars threaded through the trenches, clashing with the clang of hammers and the hiss of welding torches. Infantry soldiers crouched in trenches carved from the very bones of the ancient hive, rusted metal laced with the grime of centuries. Some shoveled rations into their mouths. Others lay slumped against crude barricades, grabbing what rest they could before the next inevitable call to battle. But Burr wasn't shouting at his troopers. His voice targeted the chain gang of convicts pressed into service. They were not combat engineers, but prisoners. Condemned men and women shackled together, driven by overseers with shock prods and the flat-back contempt of officers who regarded their lives as currency to be spent. Their hands were blistered and raw, their bodies weighed down with the burden of back-breaking labor. They hauled crates, poured ferrocrete, and set crude barricades into place. All grunt work no soldier wanted to waste their strength on. Among them sat the man who called himself Qin Mo. His shirt had been reduced to tatters. Dark metallic-appearing etchings traced strange patterns across his forearms and neck. Neither simple tattoos nor healed scars, but lines that looked almost like circuitry scribed into flesh. Around his throat hung a Psyker suppression collar, a battered iron band ringed with runes and sigils designed to dampen psychic phenomena. A small engraved plate read, Prisoner? No, 444. Unlike the others, his collar wasn't merely a restraint. It was a cage for the mind, a leash for an untrained psyker. A hunched figure approached Burr, bowing his head in a ritual of rigid etiquette. The motion was deliberate, accompanied by the stiff raise of the Aquila salute, the two-headed eagle of the Imperium, an act of deference to the Imperium, though it carried the air of a ritual long stripped of sincerity. "My Lord Captain." The voice was a dry whisper, like old parchment dragged across stone. Burr turned, eyes narrowing. Kalen. The sanctioned psyker's presence was a necessary blasphemy. Even in the filth of the Underhive, Kalon's presence carried weight. His robes, once the deep violet of the Scholastica Tsikana, the sanctioned order that trains and controls psykers, now hung in tattered ruin, the hexagrammic wards embroidered upon them frayed and faded. Let's see where this goes. His face was a ruined landscape of scars. His eyes were milky, pupilless slits that never seemed to blink, a testament to decades of sanctioned service to the Imperium. One who had survived long enough to be granted use within the regiment. Despite his decrepit form, a palpable psychic pressure surrounded Kalon, a tension in the air that set the teeth of even seasoned soldiers on edge. "You decrepit old bastard," Burr sneered, always interrupting me. This had better be important. Qin Mo lifted his head slightly, watching the exchange with quiet interest. He knew enough of psykers from half-remembered fragments of lore. Most were sacrificed to feed the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon of the Imperium. Those who survived the black ships were sanctioned, their minds bound in service. To see a sanctioned psyker serving as a mere officer's aide, that was rare. There was history here, something unsaid in the way Burr and Kalon moved around one another. Kalon had interrupted Burr countless times, and yet the captain never struck him in true anger. "They are exhausted," Kalon said simply, his white gaze sweeping over the convicts. "We need them alive. Let them rest." For a moment, Burr hesitated. No one could lie in front of Kalon. If he said they were at their limit, he had already reached into their minds to confirm it. After a brief pause, Burr exhaled sharply. "Fine." A reluctant squad of PDF logistics soldiers soon arrived, tossing rations to the convicts with visible disdain. 444. Your rations. The Emperor provides. Qin Mo caught the nutrient block, inspecting it with indifference. A standard military issue, superior to the starch-based substitutes fed to lower hive laborers. Not out of generosity, of course, simply because it was easier to distribute a single type of ration across the PDF forces and their expendable labor. He peeled open the packaging, revealing a dull, white cube. It looked like wax. He took a bite. It tasted worse than wax. A rancid, protein-heavy stench flooded his senses, the texture dissolving into a dry, chalky paste the moment it touched his tongue. It was less food, more nutritional punishment, engineered for efficiency, not palatability. Instinct demanded that he gag, but he fought it down. Breathing too sharply would send the powder into his lungs, and that would be far worse than enduring the foul taste. He forced the meal down, wiped his mouth, and retrieved a small battered object from his pocket. A journal. It was worn and frayed, its pages yellowed with grime. As he flipped through it, faint traces of ink and graphite peeked through the filth. memories scrawled in uneven handwriting. This was more than a diary. It was a lifeline. Within these pages were the fragments of another life, his life, before this nightmare, before this hellhole of steel and suffering, before Warhammer, 40k, names, faces, moments. I, Qin Mo, used to do this and that. My family and friends were so-and-so. When I was a kid, I experienced this. I liked playing this game, listening to that song. Mundane, ordinary things. And yet, as Qin Mo sat in that grimy trench, surrounded by the filth and decay of the Underhive, reading his own words, he smiled. He didn't notice Burr and Kalon approaching. They stopped before him. Burr glanced at Kalon. The old Psyker gave no signal, yet something unspoken passed between them. With a shift of his weight, Burr let the chainsword at his hip swing forward, smacking Qin Mo on the head. Ha! Burr barked out a laugh. Still awake? 444? Qin Mo looked up, eyes black as the void. For a single fleeting moment, Burr saw something in them. Something vast, something ancient, something that did not belong in a mere prisoner. A cold sweat threatened to form at the back of his neck. Then the moment passed. Psykers, Burr muttered. Always so dramatic. Kalon, meanwhile, raised a hand. Qin Mo's journal floated into the air, hovering toward Kalon's waiting palm. The old Psyker turned the pages, eyes scanning their contents. Burr smirked. What's he got in there? Weird Psyker hallucinations. Kalon didn't answer immediately. He studied the text, brow furrowing. Then finally, he closed the journal and handed it back. I can't read it. Burr frowned. What? It's not in Gothic. The structure is strange, foreign. But it is not the scrawl of a corrupted Psyker. Kalon turned to Qin Mo, his gaze unreadable. You may be an untrained Psyker, but you are still sane. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Kalon spoke again. Prisoner? No, 444, he said. Why were you arrested? Qin Mo met his gaze. A noble mistook me for prey during a hunt in the lower hive, he said. So I burned him to a crisp. Kalon's psychic probe drifted toward Qin Mo's mind, only to meet nothing. Burr frowned. Well, is he lying? Kalon exhaled. I don't know. I can't get inside his head. Burr scoffed. Doesn't matter. We need manpower. Qin Mo's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew they wanted something from him. Kalon confirmed it a moment later. We need your combat abilities, the old Psyker said. The key to your suppression collar is in my hands. His next words sent a chill through the air. When the time comes, I will unlock it. Chapter 2. Artillery. Qin Mo's lips curled into a faint smile as he stared at Kalon. Unlock a Psyker's collar, he mused. Are you sure about that? He wasn't being coy. He was being serious. Psykers were dangerous abominations, walking catastrophes, ticking time bombs waiting to detonate. The Imperium feared them for good reason. If an untrained Psyker lost control, it was bad enough. But that wasn't the true horror. The real threat lurked beyond reality. A Psyker's soul burned like a beacon in the warp, drawing the attention of the ruinous powers. At any moment, a whisper, a flicker of temptation, or a moment of weakness, could transform them into puppets of chaos, vessels through which the nightmares of the immaterium could spill into real space. To remove a suppression collar, that was suicide. And yet, Kalon said it so casually. "Worry not, mongrel," the old Psyker rasped, his voice rough as rusted chains. "Your leash stays coiled. Should I loose it, you will burn bright and brief." His pupilless eyes gleamed with cold certainty. "Die to the cult's filth or by my hand. Either way, you serve the throne." Qin Mo's gaze shifted to Kalon's staff, a golden scepter, its tip adorned with the imperial aquila, radiating a faint aura of psychic power. It wasn't just an old man's walking stick, it was a weapon. "From this hour," Kalon intoned, "you labor not with hands, but with waiting. Conserve your strength for the pyre." Then, without another word, he turned and left.
This broadcast has been paused by inquisitorial decree. Your loyalty is being monitored. Subscribe to this channel to continue receiving sanctioned lore. Failure to comply will be noted.
Burr lingered for a moment longer, glancing at Qin Mo with an expression that was neither pity nor contempt, just calculating coldness, like measuring the worth of a tool before throwing it away. Then he followed. Qin Mo rolled his eyes and lowered his head, flipping open his journal. It was one of the two things keeping him sane. The first was reading his past records, fragile, yellowing pages that chronicled memories of a life that felt more like a dream with each passing day. The second was designing weapons, technology, devices. Schematics filled the pages of his journal, some absurd, some plausible, all crafted with a precision that surprised even him. He had never been a scientist. He barely understood calculus. And yet, whenever he focused on an invention, the necessary knowledge surfaced in his mind like it had always been there. "Maybe I've been blessed by Tzinch," he muttered dryly. A joke. The first time he had spoken that name aloud, he had immediately regretted it. This was Warhammer 40K. You didn't say their names unless you wanted to draw their attention. Yet, nothing had happened. Maybe it was because Tzinch was just a translated name. Maybe it was something else entirely. Either way, since there were no whispers in his head, no demonic claws raking at his soul, he had stopped worrying about it. Right now, his mind was fixated on one design in particular, a gravity shield, a localized gravitational distortion field that rendered physical projectiles worthless. The wearer remained unaffected, but within a 2-meter radius, gravity would spike 100-fold. Bullets would be crushed mid-air. Shells would implode before impact. A defense that nullified conventional ballistics. The blueprint was complete. Now it just needed to be built, and Qin Mo had already thought of 100 different ways to do it. Perfect. Satisfied, he closed his journal and let his gaze drift downward toward a puddle at the bottom of the trench. Technically, it wasn't water. It was coolant fluid, likely from a malfunctioning laser gun, spilled by some idiot who hadn't checked his weapon properly. The liquid reflected his face perfectly. Qin Mo admired his own reflection for a moment, then sighed. "Qin Mo, you're a damn genius." But as he basked in his own brilliance, something flickered in the reflection, something small and getting bigger. His expression froze. "What the hell is that?" His hand moved instinctively, reaching out to touch the puddle, The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the object shuddered. It wasn't in the puddle. It was above him. Boom! A massive explosion erupted overhead. Metal shards ripped through the trench, sending bodies flying. A fraction of a second later, the thunderous roar of the blast rolled through the battlefield. Every soldier, every prisoner, every soul in the sector jerked upright, their heads snapping towards the source of the blast. The frontline trench was gone. Their minds stalled. Until the second shell landed right in the middle of their position. The detonation was instantaneous. 10 soldiers, men who had been eating, resting, existing, were suddenly gone. Their bodies reduced to shredded, unrecognizable gore. A jagged metal fragment spun through the air, lodging itself in the ground at Burr's feet. Artillery! Burr's roar cut through the bedlam as he dove into filth. Kalon, standing beside him, did not flinch. Instead, he raised his staff and slammed it into the ground. A purple energy field erupted around them, a shimmering barrier of psychic force. The first 2 shells had been ranging shots. Now the real bombardment began. The sky screamed as dozens, no, hundreds of shells rained down like the wrath of a vengeful god. Blinding flashes, deafening explosions, agonized screams. The trenches disintegrated under the bombardment. The PDF soldiers were completely unprepared. They weren't even in cover. Not that it would have mattered. The defenses weren't finished, and now they never would be. Huddled within Kalon's psychic barrier, Burr could do nothing but watch as his men were torn apart. "How the hell are they shelling us?" he demanded. This was supposed to be the rear lines. The PDF was advancing downward, pushing deeper into the hive. For the evolution cultists to hit them here, they would have to already be behind them. Burr shivered. Whether they had punched through the front or somehow flanked them, the result was the same. Half the garrison was dead. "We have to fall back," Burr shouted. "Use your Psyker powers. Order a retreat." "No." Kalon's voice was cold. His hollow eyes locked onto the thickening smoke. Something was moving within it. Figures. Dozens. Hundreds. The enemy was emerging. They weren't just shelling them. This was a full-scale assault. A wave of cultist soldiers charged toward the trenches, weapons raised, their frenzied screams carried by the howling wind. Burr's blood ran cold. A retreat now meant total collapse, and in the Underhive, a routed force was as good as dead. "That Psyker," Burr hissed suddenly. "That's Psyker. Find Qin Mo, unlock his collar, let him take the hit first." Kalon hesitated, then slowly he nodded. "It might be our only option." His eyes closed as his psychic senses reached out. But he was too late. Qin Mo had already taken a direct hit. He wasn't dead, but his body was riddled with shrapnel. And if someone had thermal vision, they would see something impossible. The heat from the explosion was flowing into him. His flesh was absorbing it. His wounds were closing, but his mind, rattled by the impact, was still foggy, half-conscious, caught between wakefulness and dreams. Qin Mo saw a vision. Chapter 3. The Genestealers. Qin Mo drifted through the void. Beyond the material universe, beyond the constraints of time, he existed as something vast and formless. He siphoned energy from dying suns, drawing streams of plasma and stellar debris into his essence. He devoured the sentient life that worshipped them, their prayers fading to whispers as they were consumed, and drifted endlessly through the void. For eternity, this was his existence, until he reached the fringes of a distant galactic sector. And there he saw the light. A blinding radiance tore through reality, warping the fabric of space, collapsing entire star systems into a singularity. The sheer force of the warp-born detonation shattered him, crushing his consciousness like brittle glass. A pain beyond death consumed him. He screamed, and then he woke. Tyrone Hive Primus. Qin Mo's eyes snapped open, the vision dissolving into grim reality. The battlefield surrounded him. The stench of promethium and cordite hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sickly sweet scent of charred flesh. The smoke of battle was beginning to thin, revealing the enemy's approaching ranks, the Genestealers, heretical tyrannid human hybrids, an unholy fusion of stolen genetics and hive fleet monstrosity. They came in a swarm, chittering in their corrupted tongue, their twisted, malformed faces barely recognizable as once human. Their skin stretched too tightly over alien musculature, their extra limbs twitching with hungry anticipation. Behind them, the thunder of armored treads rumbled through the trenches. The cultists had brought tanks. But Qin Mo barely noticed them. His hands instinctively searched his pockets, only to find nothing. His pockets were gone. His entire uniform had been shredded by the explosion. Lying prone in the trench, he desperately sifted through the debris, pushing aside molten metal shards and ruined ceramite plates. He whispered a silent prayer to the God Emperor, a plea to the master of mankind. Let me find it. Let me find my journal. And by some divine providence, he did. Or rather, what was left of it. The once thick tome was obliterated. Only a single tattered page remained, half of it reduced to scorched cinders. No, no, no. Qin Mo's grief was absolute. The words could be rewritten. The knowledge could be preserved. But the journal itself, the final relic of his past life, was irreplaceable. It had been a gift from his mother when he was 7 years old, a fragment of home, a tether to a life long lost. Now it was ash. Advance, advance, for the master of evolution, for our savior. The heretics' battle cries echoed across the trenches. The ground trembled beneath the march of tanks. Qin Mo clenched his fists. He carefully rolled the last surviving page into the remains of his trousers, then rose to his feet. He did not feel fear, only rage. The Genestealers had taken everything from this world. They had stolen the bodies of its people, twisted them into monstrosities, defiled the sanctity of the human form. Now they had taken his journal. They would burn for it. A figure moved toward him. Kylon. The old Psyker strode across the battlefield with unnatural speed, his power warping the air around him. Incoming lasfire and autogun rounds veered away from him at the last second, deflected by invisible force. His long robes flared with every step, embroidered with warding sigils that pulsed faintly in the dark. His eyes locked onto Qin Mo, and with a flick of his wrist, something glinted through the smoke. A key flying toward him. "Hurry!" Kylon shouted. "Unlock your side-dampening collar." But he was too late. Before the key could reach him, The heretics were upon him. A dozen hybrid soldiers charged at once, screeching in frenzy, their claws and chitin-bladed weapons raised to strike. And then the world erupted in flame. A pillar of fire exploded outward from where Qin Mo stood, incinerating everything within a 30-meter radius. The Genestealers never had the chance to scream. Their bodies turned to cinders in an instant. The side-dampening collar around his neck, marked with the sigil of prisoner 444, began to burn. Cracks formed along its surface. Qin Mo floated above the battlefield, 2 meters off the ground. His eyes blazed like twin suns. Lightning crawled across his skin, arcing from his fingertips. His body radiated heat, warp fire licking at his tattered clothes. The heretics saw him. They opened fire. Their tanks halted, turret servos whining as they adjusted their aim. Qin Mo did not move. He did not dodge. He raised his hands, one wreathed in fire, the other crackling with lightning. With a mere thought, he unleashed hell. Where the flames touched, the enemy was reduced to ash. Where the lightning struck, bodies exploded, mutant flesh bursting apart as the sheer voltage cooked them from within. A Lehman Russ battle tank attempted to fire, but its turret warped before the shot could leave the barrel, the metal twisting and screaming as if crushed by an invisible hand. The ammunition stored within was ripped from its housing, yanked into the air, then he struck it with lightning. The detonation was cataclysmic. The tank exploded from within, its turret blown skyward, a column of fire spewing into the heavens. Chunks of burning debris rained down, shattering trench walls and crushing screaming cultists beneath twisted metal. From the trenches, Burr watched in horror. Kalon, beside him, could only stare in shock. A Psyker, still wearing a suppression collar, was ripping apart an entire battlefield with raw, unchecked power. Even the crude anti-Psyker collars used in the Talon system had some effect on beta-grade Psykers, but Qin Mo stood defiant, obliterating his enemies as if the collar had never been there. There was no measured restraint, no channeling through sanctioned rituals. It was raw domination. "Fall back," Burr bellowed. Kalon hesitated. "We must hold the line." "The line is already gone," Burr roared back. "We need to—" He never finished his sentence. A deafening blast cut him off. For an instant, Kalon was there. The next, he was gone, reduced to a mist of blood and charred flesh. A heretic suicide bomber, unnoticed in the chaos, had crept too close. Struck by a stray bolt of Qin Mo's lightning, its body had detonated in a chain reaction of explosives. As Kalon's remains scattered across the battlefield, Burr wasted no time. He ran. His personal Chimera armored carrier was parked nearby. As he reached it, he wrenched open the hatch and froze. There was someone inside, or something. At first glance, it resembled a man, but its legs were too long, and it was crouched over the pilot's corpse, feeding. For a single agonizing moment, their eyes met. Then it screamed, "Rah!" and lunged. Burr barely had time to react before the nightmare was upon him. And in that moment, as the battlefield descended into total chaos, Qin Mo knew one thing. He couldn't hold out alone. "The central bunker," he roared. "Regroup at the bunker." His voice was drowned by gunfire and artillery. So he acted. He cut a path through the enemy, rallying the survivors, until at last over 200 PDF soldiers stood behind him, and together they charged toward the half-built bunker, their final refuge in the storm of war.